So we're wrapping up the final part of our discussion of completable futures. We just have a few more lessons to go here. I want to talk about the final set of features, which are these so-called arbitrary-arity methods. And arbitrary-arity methods, as we've talked about, are going to process a group of completable future objects in bulk. So let's talk about what that means. So completion stage methods that we talked about before can be triggered by one and/or two previous stages completing. So we've already discussed that. You should be familiar with that. You're using that throughout assignment number 4. However, it's sometimes necessary to trigger completion stage methods after an arbitrary number of completable futures complete. And we looked at an example earlier, and there's an example, of course, several examples in assignment 4. That's what we're going to focus on today, is that piece. So here's an example of this. We're going to look back at this test case. I think it's called test fraction multiplications 1 from the E8 project in my Java 8 folder in my live lessons GitHub repository. And if you recall what it was doing, it was generating some number of very large, random, unreduced big fractions. That's what's happening with this generate factor method. And then we're going to go ahead and reduce and multiply them in the background using completable futures. And what comes out of map is a stream of completable futures to computations that are all running in parallel in the background in the common fork join pool. And what we're going to do then is we're going to use collect and a futures collector to return a single completable future that will wait for all the other ones to finish. Really super cool way to do things. And to do that, we're going to have to use arbitrary-arity method. And an arbitrary-arity method, there are two of them, as we'll see. It's really the smallest of all the categories. It returns a completable future that is triggered after the completion of any or all of the completable futures that are passed to the methods that are involved. So let's take a look first at allOf, which is given a varargs parameter. Think of it like an array, if you will. And oddly enough, and we'll talk more about this in a second, it returns a completable future to void. There's no return value per se. It's just a completable future that says this is done or not. And what it does is it returns a completable future, which is completable future to void, that will complete only when all of the other completable futures we passed in the varargs have completed. So the way to think of this is it's like you have to wait for all the lights to be green, and then you can go. Conversely, anyOf also takes this array, this varargs parameter array. It returns a completable future to void, but the completable future that it returns will complete when any, or when the first of the completable futures that are passed in varargs finish. So think of it like a bunch of stoplights where you can go when one light turns green. So that's the way to think about that. I had lots of fun trying to come up with ways to visualize that. And I asked ChatGPT to do it for me, and it got confused and generated all kinds of gobbledygook. So I finally thought, well, I'll do it the old-fashioned way. I'll just use stoplights as a metaphor. So that's allOf, waits for everything. anyOf waits for the first thing to finish. And basically, you can use this to wait. I'm using the word wait loosely because, of course, it's returning you a completable future, so you don't actually have to block. You can chain other completion stage methods onto that completable future such that when that completable future completes, then other things can happen. And in fact, we're going to see how that works. So we're going to wait for any or all of the n completable futures that are passed as the varargs parameter here to complete. So that's what allOf and anyOf do. As I said before, you rarely block on the wait, although you could, but usually you do this so that things get notified asynchronously and reactively, just like all the other stuff we've talked about. OK. What does this set of methods do for us? This represents that reactive programming principle of responsiveness. And it makes the programs more responsive by simply not blocking the calling code, the thread that makes the call. We're going to focus on the allOf method for sort of obvious reasons, because it's the most common one. It's also the one you use in the assignment, which is kind of like then combine on steroids. If you recall, then combine worked for two completable futures. The one that the method is invoked on in the first parameter called other, whereas this takes essentially a varargs amount of them. So it could be many, more than 2. So that was the quick overview of what arbitrary methods are in the Completable Futures framework. And next, we're going to look at how they get used.